Arelm Thompson was born on November 30th, 1998, to Lynette and Aaron. As a young girl, she lived with her father, Aaron Thompson, and his pregnant girlfriend, Sheila Labar. She lived with 7 other children in the house in Aurora, Colorado, ranging in age from 6 to 15, which included Arelm's older brother, Shelley's teenage brother, and Shelley's 5 children. On November 14, 2005, Aaron notified authorities that Arelm had disappeared. He said she got into an argument with Shelley over a cookie and ran away from home between 12:30 and 1:30 p.m. During this time, temperatures outside were below freezing, and it was snowing. Police noted that Aaron and Shelley did not appear distressed over her disappearance, and neither of them had any suggestions as to where she might be. Shelley was upset, but only because the police were questioning the other children. Between 8 and 9 p.m., while officers were still searching the neighborhood for the child, Aaron said he was tired and wanted to go to bed. He agreed to a formal interview at police headquarters afterward, but fell asleep on the stairs in his house between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. Both Aaron and Shelley stopped cooperating with authorities the next day. Aaron's mother, Lynette Thompson, lived in Detroit, Michigan, when her daughter disappeared. She had not seen her since October 2001, for years prior to the night she was reported missing, and is not considered a suspect in the case. Within a day of Arelm's disappearance, Lynette gave media interviews, stating she disbelieved Aaron's story and believed Arelm had met with foul play. Lynette stated that Arelm and her brother had been born in Michigan and that Aaron and the children moved to Colorado in 2001. Lynette was supposed to go with them, but she had to be hospitalized, so she stayed behind. After she recovered, she planned to join them in their new home, but Aaron called her and told her not to come. After that, he refused to tell her where he and their children were living. Lynette admitted she struggled with drug addiction in the past, but says she is clean now, living in a homeless shelter. 3 days after Arelm disappeared, investigators announced they did not believe she disappeared on November 14th. They theorized that instead, Arelm had been murdered inside her home and had been dead for some time before her disappearance was reported, perhaps as long as a year and a half. The Thompson-Lowe children were all taken into protective custody, as was Shelley's baby daughter after she was born. Authorities cited abuse, neglect, and poor living conditions as the reasons. After that, Aaron and Shelley were allowed supervised visitations only. The first time the Thompson-Lowe children were interviewed, they supported their parents' story that Arelm ran away. They told investigators what her favorite food and color were and said she had dressed up as a witch for Halloween. However, after they were taken into foster care, the children recanted their statements. They said Shelley had told them to lie and they had not actually seen Arelm in over a year. Shelley's brother, Ray John Russell, who had moved into the home in August 2004, said he had never seen her. Both Aaron and Shelley were named as persons of interest in Arelm's disappearance and her presumed death, and their home was designated as a crime scene. Police stated the couple also refused to take a lie detector test. Investigators interviewed over 450 people, searched the Thompson home, and dug up the yard. False identification cards, including a driver's license, were found in the home, but there was no evidence as to Arelm's whereabouts. Interestingly, Arelm was reported missing just hours after a social worker visited the home. The family had been receiving housing subsidy from a charitable organization, and the social worker was supposed to determine if they were still eligible. She spent 45 to 60 minutes in the home and inspected every room but did not see Arelm anywhere. Arelm's name was not listed on the paperwork for the home, but neither was the name of her older brother. The next day, Shelley called the social worker and tried to convince her she had seen Arelm, but the social worker refused to change her previous statement. Arelm had never attended any school in the Aurora area or been registered as a homeschooled student. Shelley reportedly told one individual that she had been unable to register Arelm at school because the child's birth certificate and immunization records had been lost. But it was later determined that Arelm's father and stepmother did, in fact, have a birth certificate for her. She last received medical attention in May 2002 when she was treated for an abscessed tooth. When her father reported her missing, he said she was 7 years old, but she would have actually been 6. The picture he provided was from the summer of 2002, and he said the family had no more recent photographs. Weeks before Arelm was reported missing, Aaron requested that a non-profit foundation help provide Christmas presents for the children. However, he did not list Arelm on the application form. There was also no toothbrush and no mattress in the house for her. Aaron and Shelley said she slept with Shelley's daughter, Kayla. But Kayla denied it, and none of Arelm's DNA could be found on the bedding. Shelley's former boyfriend told police that Shelley told him that Arelm had stopped breathing in the bathtub. Shelley then attempted to revive her but was unable to. She denied being responsible for her death and stated she had simply died suddenly and no one had done anything to cause it. Shelley allegedly stated she and Aaron had concealed Arelm's death and buried her body in a field far away because the child had been abused and had a suspicious scar on her body as a result. Shelley was afraid the other children would be removed from the home. Shelley's friend Tabitha Graves also gave a similar account. She said in the summer or fall of 2004, Shelley was riding in the car with her when she suddenly said Arelm had died in her sleep months before. She said she and Aaron decided not to call 911 after they discovered the body, and Aaron took the body away in his Ford Expedition and came back a long time later without her. After Shelley told her this story, Tabitha began tape recording their telephone conversations and would later turn the tapes over to the police. In the conversations, Shelley referred to Arelm in the past tense and said she would have Aaron place flowers on the child's grave. She repeatedly urged Tabitha not to tell the police what happened and expressed fears of going to jail and losing her children. Tabitha noted Shelley did not like Arelm and had trouble disciplining her. Velma Belzer, Shelley's aunt, remembered a phone call she got from Shelley in the summer of 2003. Shelley asked her what to do if a child stops breathing and said either she or Aaron were going to discipline his daughter, and she had passed out. Velma advised Shelley to call 911. A couple of days later, when she asked Shelley about the child's condition, Shelley reportedly replied, "I took care of it." In May 2006, a grand jury was convened to investigate Arelm's disappearance. That same month, Shelley died suddenly at the age of 33 from heart disease. Shelley had maintained her innocence in Arelm's case until her death. She was never interviewed by police because she refused to speak to them. Aaron continued to maintain his innocence in Arelm's disappearance. In May 2007, Aaron was indicted on nearly 60 counts, the most serious of which was child abuse resulting in death. That charge carried a maximum sentence of 48 years to life in prison. Authorities believe Arelm died sometime between May 2002 and August 2004, probably during 2003. It was during 2003 that the couple told the other children that she had moved to Michigan to live with her mother. Shortly afterward, all of Arelm's belongings were placed in the basement. None of the children in the family saw or heard anything from her again. Her siblings told investigators that before she went missing, Arelm was repeatedly beaten and kept in a closet for hours at a time, often as punishment for bedwetting. She was also denied proper nourishment and medical attention. All the children stated they were beaten with a belt, a baseball bat, and other objects. The children claimed at least one of them was beaten every day, and several of them bore scars from the abuse. Shelley's son Andrew stated that he heard Aaron beating Arelm in the basement one night. Arelm was screaming. Then suddenly the screaming stopped, and Andrew heard Aaron swear. Andrew never saw Arelm again. A day or two later, he asked his mother where Arelm was, and Shelley told him she had moved to Michigan. Andrew said he noticed a bad smell in the basement a few days later, which lasted for several weeks. He said Shelley began attending church and saying nightly prayers a short time after Arelm disappeared, which was uncharacteristic of her previous behavior. The children testified against Aaron at his trial in the fall of 2009, repeating their stories of abuse. Aaron's defense acknowledged Arelm was dead and Aaron had helped cover up her death, but they said Shelley actually killed her, and Aaron only helped her hide this fact. Aaron was convicted of 31 out of the 55 charges against him, including child abuse resulting in death in Arelm's case. He was acquitted of 22 charges, mainly those related to his alleged abuse of the other children. In November 2009, he was sentenced to 114 years in prison. Prior to his sentencing, The judge gave him several chances to reveal where his daughter's body was buried before she sentenced him, but each time he just shook his head and said no. He quickly appealed his sentence and continues to attempt to do so. The children were all placed in foster care or with relatives. Sadly, as of today, the location of Arelm's body remains a mystery. Dylan Levi Bennett was born in 1992, and Austin Jean Bennett was born in 1996. Their mother, Mary, was a single mom who was originally from Oklahoma but would move to Colorado Springs later in life. In the late 90s, she was suffering from mental illnesses and was reported to be neglecting the boys and their younger brother, James. Because of the mental illnesses she suffered from, she voluntarily put the boys in foster care. They unfortunately went to live in the home of Edward and Linda Bryant as foster children in Monument, Colorado. Their mother visited the boys once a week and saw they were generally happy and well taken care of. Thinking she was doing the right thing, she allowed the Bryants to adopt the boys just months later in March 2000. Austin was only 4 years old at the time, and Dylan was 7. The Bryants collected nearly $1,800 a month from the El Paso County Department of Human Services for their care. Not long after being adopted, the Bryants changed Dylan's first name to Edward after his adopted father, which was not what Dylan wanted. He then began to have behavior problems and lashed out. They also changed the spelling of Austin's first name from Austin to Austen and changed his middle name to Eugene after his adopted father. The boys then began asking their mom when they would be able to come home, but they were legally adopted, and she had lost her legal rights to them. Soon after, the Bryants no longer allowed their mother to be in contact with the children. Colorado law states that once a child is adopted, social workers are no longer required to check up on them. This would eventually lead to their demise. They moved to Texas in 2005. 6 years later, one of the boys' adopted brothers and 2 other foster children, adults at this point, came forward to police and reported that they had not seen Austin since before the family moved to Texas, possibly as early as the same year he was adopted. Also, the other children in the family had been forbidden to talk about Dylan and Austin. According to one of the former foster children, Austin was beaten, denied food several times a week as a form of punishment, and locked in a trunk in the garage for days at a time. He was also wrapped so tightly in a blanket that he couldn't move and struggled to breathe. Another foster child said Austin had told him that he had been locked in a trunk and shocked with a taser. He said he moved in with the Bryants a year and a half after Dylan and Austin and that he had never met Dylan, having been told the boy had been sent to live with relatives in Arizona. He also said that he believed his adopted parents might have actually killed Austin. When questioned, Linda at first claimed the children were living with her, then claimed they had gone to visit their biological mother in Oklahoma. She then admitted they hadn't lived with her in years. She stated that a therapist had suggested that Austin be disciplined by being wrapped in blankets. Linda and Edward Eugene stated both boys had run away from home, but they gave different accounts. Linda said both ran away in May 2003, and Edward said Dylan ran away in 2001 and Austin in 2005. However, neither one ever reported the boys missing. Investigators determined that Austin was enrolled at Monument Academy Charter School until August 2003, when he was withdrawn, supposedly to be homeschooled. They could find no school or medical records for either Edward or Austin after 2003. Linda tried to make it look like the boys were still living with her and even printed photographs of other children off the internet, displayed them in her home, and told the other adopted children that they were pictures of Austin and Dylan. The Bryants separated sometime after moving to Texas in 2005. They filed for bankruptcy in 2007 and listed $126,000 in adoption benefits as part of their income. They would also list 8 children, including Austin and Edward, as dependents. They still had 5 children in their care by 2011. A 6th was in prison and the 7th was in the military out of state. In February 2011, the Bryants were arrested and charged with multiple counts of theft, conspiracy, forgery, and attempting to influence a public official. They had collected approximately $175,000 in benefit payments for the children's care after the children were no longer living in their home. Edward claimed he had no knowledge of the family receiving benefits for the children. Linda admitted she had deliberately covered up their disappearances to keep the payments coming. Linda was charged with 148 felony counts, and Edward was charged with 13 felonies. However, none of the charges were related to the actual disappearance of the children or the alleged abuse of them, but were for Medicaid fraud only. When they were charged, the other 5 minor children in their care became wards of the state of Texas. In January 2012, Linda pled guilty to 54 felonies, 4 counts of theft, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit theft, and 48 counts of attempting to influence a public servant. In March, she was sentenced to 42 years in prison for welfare fraud. In April, Edward pled guilty to 5 similar felony charges, and 19 of the other counts were dismissed. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison for welfare fraud. Some of Linda's relatives were told that Dylan had gone to Arizona to help care for her 82-year-old father. Others were told he had been sent to a boot camp for bad behavior. One relative testified at the sentencing that Linda told her Austin was sent to an insane asylum in Colorado. One of her adopted children told investigators she asked him to have a friend come over and pretend to be Dylan if a caseworker ever came by. An El Paso County Sheriff's deputy told the court that another relative had lodged a complaint over Dylan's disappearance with the El Paso County Department of Human Services. The detective said that for some reason, a caseworker was never sent. Police believe that the oldest boy, now legally named Edward Dylan Bryant, has been missing since 2001 and Austin Bryant since 2003, but neither of the Bryants have been charged in the boys' disappearances. Their mother still seeks answers, but extensive searches in Colorado have turned up no indication of their whereabouts. Authorities believe they may no longer be alive, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Nathaniel Holmes was born November 5, 2000. When he was 8 years old, his parents divorced and his father, Ben, received custody of him and his 3 siblings. His family traveled the world, and Nathaniel enjoyed playing the bagpipes, hunting, and playing the online video game World of Warcraft. He lived in Arvada, Colorado with his father and siblings and was homeschooled. However, when he was 16 years old, he enrolled as a junior at Hidden Lake High School in Westminster, Colorado. The school focused on the enrollment of students that struggled academically. He eventually made friends, but his friends were considered a bad crowd, and his parents did not approve of them. Nathaniel was described as a quiet, shy, and calm person. On December 18, 2017, when his dad picked him up from school, it was obvious that Nathaniel had taken something like a drug and seemed very sedated and confused. Eventually, Nathaniel told his dad that he had taken some Xanax that he got from school and said it was his first time ever taking it and he didn't like the way it made him feel. That night, he and his siblings had dinner at his mom's house, as they did every Monday night. His dad had him spend the night with his mom that night so that she could keep an eye on him because he had to work and didn't want him to be alone. This was the first time he had stayed at his mom's house in several years. His mom searched his belongings and found more Xanax pills and confiscated them. The next morning, on December 19th, his mother dropped him off at school. Shortly after, he told the principal that he needed to speak to his friend Anthony about something important. But the principal told him no and told him to go to class and said he could talk to his friend at lunchtime. It is believed that Nathaniel at this point walked out of the school, called his mother from an unknown phone, and told her that she would not need to pick him up from school that day because a friend of his father's was going to pick him up and go get ice cream. However, this was not true. He was not reported missing by any of the staff at school, and this was the last day his family would see him. Investigators believe he left the school of his own free will, and his family believes his departure was spontaneous. They feared he might have met with foul play and, to this day, have continued to search for him. Prior to his disappearance, he had never even spent the night at a friend's house. Strangely, it was later learned that Nathaniel may have been hanging out at a homeless shelter prior to his disappearance, where teenagers often hung out. He had recently turned 17 when he disappeared, and he left all his belongings behind, including his money, iPad, and iPhone, which had been broken for over a month. It was noted that Nathaniel had recently changed his password to his iPad, which he had been using to communicate with his friends since his iPhone was broken. Investigators told his dad they were unable to get into his iPad or iPhone to search for clues due to Apple's security measures. He did have a car, but he had recently had a fender bender, and his dad had taken it away. His friend that he wanted to talk to urgently that morning has come forward and states that he does not know why Nathaniel would have wanted to talk to him so badly, but has helped a lot in the search for him. Some of his missing flyer posters posted in Old Town have been vandalized, and they are unsure if there is anything suspicious behind this. He is listed as a missing runaway, but his family does not believe he ran away and then chose not to return. His family still continues to search for answers, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Dale Dwayne Williams was born July 15, 1956. He would later marry Diana, and the couple lived in the small town of Nucla, Colorado, with their 2 daughters. He owned the Pro Body Shop in Nucla and is described as well-liked and very helpful to anyone that needed it. He was family-oriented, a great father, and a very hard worker. On May 27, 1999, he received a phone call while at work, and his friend Tom overheard part of the conversation and said the way he was talking, he believed he was talking to a female. When he hung up the phone, he said he was going to help a stranded motorist in Bedrock, which is about a 20 to 30-minute drive from the shop. However, he never mentioned exactly who he was going to help. His friend said that nothing else seemed out of the ordinary, and Dale said he would be back soon. This was strange because, although he owned the body repair shop, he did not usually get calls regarding leaving work to help anyone with car problems. On the way there, he stopped by a local business in town to let a customer know when her vehicle would be ready. While he was there, he mentioned that he was en route to assist a stranded motorist. This was the last time Dale was ever seen. It wasn't unusual for Dale to work late into the night or even early morning hours. But when he didn't come home by later in the morning, his wife became worried and drove to her mother-in-law's house, and the two went looking for him. They first stopped by the shop, but Dale was nowhere to be found. Later that day, after no luck finding him, she reported him missing. Dale drove a white 1994 Ford pickup truck, which had the words Pro Body Shop stenciled on the sides. Many weeks would go by with no signs of Dale, despite a large search party. Several weeks after he disappeared, a family was fishing in a local swimming hole when one of the boys' hooks got caught on something. He then swam out to get it and discovered that it was hooked on a truck. He pulled the dash cover through the window, and it was labeled Pro Body Shop. The truck was in over 10 feet of water and was turned to the on position, and the window was halfway down. It was removed and determined to be Dale's truck, but there were no signs of Dale. It was believed that someone most likely purposefully steered the truck into the water, which is why the window was halfway down and the truck in gear. The swimming hole is located between the San Miguel River and the Dolores River, and it could only be known to the locals because it is in such a secluded area. Some of his tools were found on the side of the road in the opposite direction from where his truck was found. Investigators believe the suspect did this to throw off the investigation. A witness had reported seeing an individual matching Dale's description at approximately 6 p.m. on the day he disappeared at a market. Strangely, a neighbor claimed that Dale's truck was parked outside the Pro Body Shop about a couple of hours after he left to assist the caller. However, investigators have never been able to confirm either sighting. There were several strange occurrences prior to Dale's disappearance. One of Dale's friends was being abusive to his wife, and she confided in Dale and his wife Diana. The couple then secretly helped her move out of state. When the former friend inquired about where his wife was, Dale refused to tell him, and he became very angered. One of Dale's daughters worked at a local fast food restaurant, and on the day of his disappearance, an unidentified man walked into the restaurant asking for his daughter. She happened to be off work that day, so the man walked back outside and spoke on a payphone for about 15 minutes. Torn photographs of Dale and the former friend's family were found outside the Pro Body Shop shortly after his disappearance, along with scattered .22 caliber bullets. Also, Dale's wife ran a local video store in town and would find her husband's .22 caliber revolver inside a nighttime drop box several weeks later. Authorities believe that someone had broken into Dale's business and stolen the photos and the gun. Investigators questioned the couple's former friend, but he denied any involvement in the burglaries. He had an alibi around the time Dale disappeared, and investigators ruled him out as a suspect after passing a polygraph test. Strangely, missing poster flyers were being removed by someone on a regular basis. His family decided to place a surveillance camera in the post office where the posters were repeatedly being removed. It was discovered that the person removing his missing poster signs was the former friend of Dale's who was angry at him. When questioned, he admitted to removing the signs but was not charged with any crime. As of today, no one has been arrested for Dale's disappearance, and sadly, he remains missing, and the case remains unsolved. Becky Elhani was born December 27, 1985, and was one of 10 siblings. When she was 22 years old, she lived in Colorado Springs, Colorado with her on-again, off-again boyfriend Daniel Derriere. The reason for the on-again, off-again is because they apparently had a very troubled and volatile relationship. In 2007, they were arguing about phone calls her ex-husband made to Becky, and she ended up being arrested for assault after punching Daniel in the face. Daniel was then arrested for assault months after because Becky claimed he had used a stun gun on her nearly 20 times. But that case was later dismissed. Once, while the two were broken up, Becky began dating her ex-husband Wesley. During this time, Daniel became angry and allegedly hacked into her MySpace account and posted inappropriate pictures of her. However, even after this incident, Daniel and her would reconcile. On March 29, 2008, they were visiting one of Becky's sister's home in Colorado Springs when the couple got into another argument. Her sister stated that Daniel started yelling at her, and Becky kept saying she didn't want to leave. Her sister kept telling her to stay, but Daniel insisted that she leave with him. At 1:15 a.m., she would finally leave her sister's home with Daniel. A few hours later, Daniel was suspiciously spotted in his 4Runner in Woodland Park in Taylor County, Colorado. On the evening of March 31st, police went to do a welfare check on Becky and went to their apartment in the 6000 block of Twin Oaks Drive. When the officers approached the apartment, they heard a gunshot. Inside, they found the deceased body of Daniel. He had committed suicide as soon as he saw the police approaching. However, there was no sign of Becky at the scene and no indications of a struggle in the apartment. Daniel was scheduled to go to court a couple days after he killed himself and faced charges of harassment and computer crime charges from the incident when he hacked Becky's MySpace account. Daniel's car was eventually discovered in Taylor County, and blood found inside the vehicle was later determined to be that of Becky's. However, a search of the park turned up no indication of Becky's whereabouts. Her ex-husband was ruled out as a suspect in her disappearance, but Daniel remains a suspect, and many people believe that Becky met with foul play at the hands of him after they left her sister's house. According to her friends, Daniel had previously threatened to kill Becky and then himself. He was afraid she was seeing her ex-husband and warned that if he couldn't have her, no one could. Although her family doesn't believe she is still alive, they continued to search for answers and hoped to give her a proper burial one day. As of today, Becky has never been found and the case remains unsolved. The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with the bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place on the planet as New Zealand, such bloody tragedies occur. After all, New Zealand is first and foremost picturesque nature with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today, our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Oakland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Carmen and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987, in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while, her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, she completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Carmen was a loyal friend and comrade to many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in a store as a marketer, and in her spare time, she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her unusual choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary, and even more so, undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients. It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callahan. Bradford James Joseph Callahan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and a busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly, and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant, and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and a measured pace of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son, Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Carmen and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years, they parted but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to maintain a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as possible. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009, he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services at the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he, in turn, simply ignored the requests of his former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly affected the alimony he paid under the agreement to Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. The relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party with hostility and aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a series of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement on child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Thomas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman using video camera footage and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of the police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink, and in the shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash can and an overturned clothes horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands. And upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help, and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase revealed traces of blood on some of the items. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment, there was an envelope with Misty's name and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding traces of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Auckland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing. But the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, they discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not connected to the cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house and that a neighbor had seen through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? Police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining his bank card details, tracing his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callahan purchased a meat cleaver and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events that did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list. It turned out that on one workday, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around the property for a long time. It was strange but not so strange that the workers who saw him would consider reporting such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callahan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callahan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to pervert the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and was scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. He thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he struck her several times again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment and that he would not be able to get back everything that was. But it did not upset him at all because by such an act, he had solved his main problem and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callahan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside the supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene, and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Oahu Bay near downtown Oakland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body. But an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Carmen Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, A private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Venning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Venning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was newly charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callahan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callahan dismembered Mrs. Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Auckland when Bradford Callahan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callahan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to pervert the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Venning sentenced Brad Callahan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callahan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences were to be served concurrently. Judge Venning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callahan to justice. Mr. Callahan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on 2 families, said Detective Inspector Mark Benefield. Callahan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Mark Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Mark Benefield, during the interview, explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, we have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court, said Mark Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callahan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did. For the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. We will never forgive him for what he did to our family, said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers, added her stepfather, Wayne. Callahan's attorney, Stuart Grieve, said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing. We are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and uncontrollable anger, a person can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callahan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out because it wasn't his fault. Absurd. Jennifer Bugwa was born in Kenya on August 15, 1982. When she was around 18 years old, she would move to Taunton, Massachusetts. And then in 2012, she moved into an apartment in the 500 block of South Main Street in Fall River, Massachusetts. She had 2 sisters who also lived in Massachusetts while the rest of her family remained in Kenya. She would work as a nurse in various nursing homes and also worked for Mary Kay Cosmetics. 31-year-old Jennifer was last seen by a neighbor outside her apartment building on May 27, 2014. Her neighbor saw her inside her car shuffling papers. The next day, her gray Toyota Camry was found abandoned at a Shell gas station off Route 1 in North Attleboro, Massachusetts near Route 295. It was about a 30-minute drive from her apartment, and it had apparently been left there between midnight and 3 a.m. Investigators would find keys and one of her sandals in a nearby dumpster. Her apartment was found with the lights and TV left on, along with her purse and her driver's license and cell phone still inside. A state police emergency response team performed a search of the area for Jennifer, but she was never found. Her family describes her as quiet and reserved, and as far as they know, she was single at the time she disappeared. The last activity on her Facebook page was on May 19th, and her family reported that she could have been depressed. Her family hired a private investigator, but due to the lack of money would no longer be able to use their services. Strangely, her landlord allegedly refused to let police or her family inside her apartment when she disappeared. The next day, he packed up all of her things and moved them out of the apartment. Her family said they worried the action of the landlord may have hampered the investigation and possibly prevented the police from finding any clues that might have led to Jennifer. Her loved ones are desperate for answers, but there are little details available in this case, and as of today, it remains unsolved. Jesus De La Cruz was born January 3, 1990 to Magdalena Rodriguez and Juan De La Cruz. When he was 6 years old, he went to Connery Elementary School and lived on Park Street in Lynn, Massachusetts with his mother, but his father lived in Texas. On September 28, 1996, around 6 p.m., Jesus and a 9-year-old boy were walking on the sidewalk toward his home on Park Street. The boys were heading home after playing in Bennett's Circle for several hours, and Jesus was pushing his pink Huffy bicycle, which had 2 flat tires at the time. The boys were approached by a man pushing a mountain bike along with his dog. Jesus asked the man if he could have the bike, which the man told him yes, and Jesus started following the man towards the Len Common area. Jesus' friend did not follow them because he was under instructions to wait for his father. Jesus' mother was visiting a neighborhood friend, and when she returned home around 7 p.m., Jesus was not there. She would report him missing after midnight. The man that lured Jesus away with the promise of a new bicycle was soon identified as 26-year-old Robert Levesque. The man was walking with either a shepherd or collie breed dog with 1 white eye and 1 brown eye. The man was well known by the children in the neighborhood. Because of his dog's distinctive features of having 2 different colored eyes, Robert lived in an apartment on Western Avenue just around the corner from Jesus' home. When investigators searched Robert's apartment, they discovered duct tape, handcuffs, a hammer, and the dog with 2 different colored eyes. It is not known if the items were related to Jesus' disappearance. Strangely, Robert called in sick at his job where he worked as a store clerk at the Crosby's Market in Marblehead the same night that Jesus disappeared. He was arrested about a month later and charged with a parole violation, motor vehicle offenses, and possession of stolen property in mid-October 1996. However, he was never charged in connection with Jesus' disappearance due to lack of evidence. The Massachusetts Department of Social Services accused Jesus' mother of neglect in the weeks following her son's disappearance. The agency said that Rodriguez did not report Jesus as a missing child until midnight on September 28th, 6 hours after his apparent abduction. Others speculated that Jesus was abducted as the result of theorized drug use by his family members. However, his mother denied any wrongdoing in her son's case and maintained that the claims were the result of racism against Hispanic individuals. Various rumors concerning Jesus' case circulated after his disappearance. Some people claimed that he had been taken to Puerto Rico, New York City, or maybe even the Dominican Republic as part of a deal to keep his mom out of trouble. She has denied the allegations and has since moved to another part of Massachusetts where she works in a group home as a counselor for troubled kids. Jesus' father had been accused of abusing Jesus and threatening to abduct him from Magdalena's custody prior to his disappearance. Authorities stated that Juan was at home at the time his son went missing and has never been charged in connection with his disappearance. He has cooperated and maintained contact with the investigators working on the case. A DNA sample was obtained from Juan in 2011, which was profiled and uploaded into Cody's in hopes of finding a match. At one point, the pond at Pine Grove Cemetery was drained along with other ponds, but no evidence was found. There have been many possible sightings of Jesus around the country over the years, but none of the sightings have been confirmed. Police are hopeful that Jesus is still alive, but as of today, this case remains unsolved. Vicki Lockwood was born October 30th, 1949 in Harper, Kansas, and raised on a wheat farm. In 1968, she settled in Worcester, Massachusetts with her fiancé Lowell Lamberton, who at the time was earning a degree to become a college professor while she was earning her bachelor's degree from Clark University. They would marry the next year in 1969. In 1974, after only 5 years of marriage, Vicki and Lowell would separate. At this time, 24-year-old Vicki was getting very close to earning her master's degree in psychology at Assumption College. However, she would never get the chance because she would go missing only 1 month after their separation. When Vicki and Lowell had separated, she moved out of the couple's home and into an apartment at 27 Westford Road in Worcester. She would store the majority of her personal belongings in a garage owned by her psychology professor, Dr. Roger Barker. She and Dr. Barker, who was also married, were allegedly having an affair. He would even accompany her to New York City when she applied for her psychology doctorate at Columbia University in early 1974. Vicki's husband suspected that she was involved in a relationship with Barker at the time. Her brother also stated that he had seen the couple together at the mall. Some of her friends at the time admitted that they knew about the affair and that she wanted to marry him. The day before she vanished in February of 1974, Vicki called her husband and said she wanted to discuss getting back together. At this time, the couple had been estranged for about 6 weeks, but they made plans to have dinner when she returned from a weekend trip to Maine with one of her girlfriends. However, her husband became very concerned when she failed to contact him after the weekend and called the girlfriend who supposedly accompanied her to Maine. The friend said that she and Vicki had not spoken recently and that there had been no trip to Maine planned. Vicki's husband went to Assumption College to ask if Dr. Barker had any knowledge of his wife's whereabouts. However, staff members told him that Dr. Barker was in Vail, Colorado for a skiing trip. He had only planned to spend the weekend, but claimed he had been hospitalized with pneumonia and had to stay in Colorado for 2 more weeks. His wife, however, had only stayed the weekend and had returned to Massachusetts. It is believed Vicki may have traveled to Vail after Dr. Barker's wife left, but this could never be proven. Lowell would visit Dr. Barker again sometime during March 1974, about a month after Vicki was last seen. Dr. Barker admitted that he was storing her belongings in his garage, but claimed he did not know Vicki well and did not know her whereabouts. He also insinuated he believed she found another romantic partner. Vicki's two brothers would retrieve her possessions from Barker's garage in 1975, 1 year after she disappeared. Friends of Vicki claimed they didn't know where she was and said she never told them of her plans. Dr. Barker was also questioned but once again maintained his innocence, saying he knew nothing about her disappearance and denied ever having a romantic relationship with her. He suggested the only contact with her was that he helped her move out of her husband's home and allowed her to store her belongings in his garage. Some of her family members believed she chose to leave voluntarily and found a new relationship with another man. Her husband said that the idea wasn't that far-fetched because she had considered the idea prior to her disappearance. As a result, a missing persons report was never filed for Vicki until 2010 after her brother created a webpage dedicated to her disappearance, and it caught the eye of a Worcester police detective who filed a missing persons report. This was 36 years after she vanished. Come to find out, her social security number was never used after she disappeared in 1974, and she never renewed her driver's license. One of Vicki's brothers located a close friend of Vicki's in 1980, who had not been questioned after Vicki's initial 1974 disappearance. Her friend and Lawson at one point lived on the same floor as Vicki at 74 Beaver Street, and they talked every day. She said that Vicki called her the night she last spoke to her estranged husband and told her that she was going to Colorado. Vicki promised to call and when she returned, but she never heard from her again, and said she can't believe her friend vanished without keeping in touch with anyone close to her. Although Vicki grew up in Harper, Kansas, she told people she was originally from Colorado. Her husband believed she was ashamed of her upbringing. In a 2012 interview, her husband reported that shortly after her disappearance, a phone call was placed to a neighbor of her family's former home looking for Vicki's family. However, her family had moved to Texas at the time of the strange call. The anonymous caller stated that Vicki had left for Europe and asked for her husband Lowell's phone number. Police investigated and found no evidence of her traveling there. Her husband also stated that he got an acceptance letter on her behalf from New York University, but he was unaware that she had ever applied there. Dr. Barker, who supposedly kept her stuff in his garage, has been interviewed by police. However, he stated that he does not remember ever going to Colorado with Vicki. A DNA profile for Vicki was created in Namas, but no remains have matched. At one point, authorities wondered if she was the lady in the dunes, a Jane Doe whose body was found in Provincetown on July 26, 1974. However, the body was not that of Vicki's, and as of today, she has never been found and the case remains unsolved. Christopher Brian Lewis was born July 20, 2000 and was nicknamed Chris. He went to Lee School and lived in Boston, Massachusetts, and was the oldest of 4 boys. On February 4, 2014, the school bus dropped 13-year-old Chris off at the corner of Morton and West Selden in the Dorchester area as it usually did. One of his friends walked with him until they were only a block from Chris's home. He was expected home at 5:30 p.m., but when he had not arrived or called by 6 p.m., his mother, Nina, became very worried. According to Nina, Chris was responsible about coming home on time and letting her know if he was going to be late. The Boston Police Department reports that Chris has gone missing on previous occasions, but was always found in Dorchester in the Fields Corner area. Nina says that her son has never run away and was always either in school or at home. However, Chris never arrived home that evening and has never been heard from again. Authorities believe he might have left on his own accord, but there is no concrete evidence to prove this. There are very few details available in this case and his family still seeks answers. But as of today, the case remains unsolved. 23-year-old Evelyn Valibayuva, a native of Azerbaijan, lived in Unit 11 at 11 Hodges Avenue in Quincy, Massachusetts, and worked at a local restaurant. She spoke with her mother nightly, who still lived in her home country, but then her mother abruptly stopped hearing from her. Evelyn's boyfriend, Duncan Boyd, reported her missing on July 19, 2011. Upon searching her apartment, her door was found left ajar and her bedroom furniture had been moved, and both her cell phones and laptop were missing. Her U.S. visa, passport, and immigration papers were all left behind, along with a whiteboard where she noted upcoming events. That same day, Boston police reported that her pocketbook with her checkbook, student ID, and cell phones had been found in Dorchester and turned in by a citizen. However, it would be 10 more days before the Quincy police found a missing persons report. During the investigation, it was discovered that the last verified sighting of Evelyn was on a surveillance camera in Quincy on July 17th, 2 days before her boyfriend reported her missing. She was sighted stepping off a North Quincy Red Line train just 200 yards from her apartment shortly after leaving work around midnight. One of her concerned friends came into town to help with the search and was told by police that adults have the right to go missing. Frustrated, her friends and boyfriend hired a private investigator less than a week after her disappearance due to the lack of interest by the police. They also contacted neighboring police departments, media outlets to push for a deeper investigation, and since she had retained her citizenship, the Azerbaijan embassy. It would still take 3 weeks for the case to be handed over to the state police. When they took a second look at Evelyn's apartment, they found a significant amount of blood under the carpet in Evelyn's bedroom, indicating that she was attacked and possibly killed there. Someone had attempted to clean the carpet, but blood had seeped underneath. The building's handyman would later admit that suspiciously, he had cleaned her apartment after she disappeared. The building's handyman was John Castung, who was interviewed and ultimately named a suspect. While he told investigators he had never seen nor met Evelyn, her roommate would completely contradict this. John was also made a suspect because of his past crimes. In 1987, he approached a 9-year-old girl walking her beagle puppy and lured her to a remote area by saying he knew where they could pick some blueberries. Instead, he would take her to a gravel pit where he would physically and sexually assault her. Police said John told them that he had master keys to all the doors and apartments and said he was at Evelyn's building on the day she was last seen, but that he did not see her or harm her. He and his lawyer claimed that he was just an easy target because of his criminal background. John is the prime suspect in Evelyn's presumed murder, but he has never been charged in her case. He pled guilty to probation violation after her disappearance and served 15 months in federal prison before being released in 2015. Evelyn's family stated that since the Quincy police didn't initially take Evelyn's disappearance seriously, that John slipped through the cracks in the system. Her boyfriend Duncan was eventually ruled out as a suspect. As of today, Evelyn has never been found and this case remains unsolved. The case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book, Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister, Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, Her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter, Sheila, in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice. Adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score. And to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, Labar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months until in the early 80s, she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad. And he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home. began to behave not just aggressively but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the madwoman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners, both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill Labar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail, frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion, who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch. But soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill Labar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted, House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. It got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch, Labar, constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth inherited by her. In 2004, Labar met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLorge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and Labar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy Labar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks, but he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin. There were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon, Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether. And when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made: a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Hanny Michael and several other men confessed to horrific crimes. But judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court, who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. 21-year-old Kim Sue Leggett was last seen on October 9, 1984, standing outside the Ross Cotton Gin where she worked in Mercedes, Texas as a secretary. The Ross Cotton Gin was a family business owned by her father-in-law. At 4:30 p.m., a customer came to the gin with a load of produce and Kim helped him weigh it. Shortly afterwards, she was seen talking to two men in the parking lot, next to Kim's car and a white sports car. When the customer came back with another load at 5 p.m., Kim was no longer there. At 4:45 p.m. that same day, Kim's parents received two phone calls saying she had been kidnapped and the abductor wanted a ransom. They originally didn't take the call seriously and assumed it was a joke. Still, they attempted to call Kim at her work but received no answer. Her father then drove to the gin and found her car still parked in the parking lot with her purse and keys inside. Kim was a college student studying to be an X-ray technician, and her books were found open on the desk in the office with a pencil to mark her place and a calculator left on. However, Kim was nowhere to be found. A ransom note was mailed to her family after her disappearance, demanding $250,000 in cash. The letter appeared to be in Kim's handwriting, but the writing on the envelope was in another person's handwriting. The witness was able to provide enough details to a sketch artist to get sketches created of both men that she was last seen talking to. One theory is that Kim's stepfather, Lefty Gardner, at the time of her abduction, was a pilot and a member of the Confederate Air Force, now called the Commemorative Air Force, and maybe he refused to smuggle contraband into Mexico. Some think Kim's abduction was retaliation for his refusal, but little evidence was found to support this theory. There were some flaws in the investigation of Kim's disappearance. Two of the biggest mistakes were the Mercedes Police Department waited 20 days to call in federal investigators, and the area where Kim went missing was never treated as a crime scene. In 2012, the FBI released aerial photos of the area around the Cotton Gin in hopes of sparking new leads and interest in the case. However, despite those efforts and a $100,000 reward, no one has come forward with information. DNA testing was also done on the envelopes but led nowhere. Kim's husband was also looked at as a possible suspect. However, he cooperated fully with the investigation and maintains his innocence in her disappearance. She left behind her 1-year-old son and her husband, who filed for divorce after Kim went missing. No suspects have ever been named in her disappearance and the case remains unsolved. 9-year-old Dorian Thomas lived in an apartment complex in the 1300 block of Northwest 9th Avenue in Amarillo, Texas, where he lived with his mother. Dorian was last seen on October 26, 1998, several blocks from his mother's apartment near his grandmother's house, riding his bicycle. The day he disappeared, a witness claims to have seen him filling up his bicycle tire with air. The bicycle he was riding was made by the company Huffy, and it had a girl's frame-colored aqua green and had very small white rubber tires and rims along with the words freestyle and printed on one side. It disappeared with him and has never been recovered. There was a bicycle similar to Dorian's found at a nearby lake, but it was later determined not to be his. He was reported as a missing child. After more than 24 hours after his disappearance, and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance remains unclear. Authorities have been unable to determine if he was abducted or if other factors were involved in the case. A possible clue is that Dorian was one of the children who discovered the body of Gloria and Covington, who had been stabbed to death in August of 1997, more than 1 year prior to his disappearance. Dorian was playing in Hilltop Park in Amarillo with friends when they came across Covington's remains behind the YMCA building. Linda Gale Jackson was also killed 1 month after Covington's death, and the cases may be related. Witnesses reported that she entered a vehicle similar to the truck involved in Covington's case. Both women's homicides remain unsolved. Another incident involving Dorian was a woman was beaten by an unidentified white man in September 1998 and stopped at Dorian's mother's home for help. She said her attacker had red hair pulled in a ponytail, blue eyes, and a mustache. The woman said that Dorian was home at the time and was seen by the attacker. The woman claimed that the assailant threatened to harm her again in the future. She personally believes the individual may be involved in Dorian's disappearance, but there is no proof of this. Authorities also have been unable to determine if Dorian's disappearance is actually related to the unsolved murders. Several of Dorian's relatives initially believed a family friend took him to Dallas, Texas. However, the individual called authorities shortly thereafter, and it was determined he was not involved in Dorian's disappearance. Extensive searches of the Amarillo area have produced no clues as to his whereabouts. As of today, Dorian remains missing and the case remains unsolved. Danielle Marie Sleeper was last seen at her home in Magnolia, Texas on March 22, 2015. She and her husband of 5 years, Austin, had attended a cookout at a friend's home in Field Store, Texas. They arrived there in 2 separate vehicles, but left together in a white 1996 Ford F-350 pickup truck at 1 a.m. They were arguing and Austin was insisting she come home, but Danielle wanted to spend the night at a friend's house. Danielle had made plans to meet her friends later in the day, but she never showed up and didn't respond to any text messages, and calls to her cell phone went directly to voicemail. On the night she disappeared, there were numerous text messages and other activity on the phone until 3:12 a.m. The last time the phone was turned on was 2 days after she was last seen, when it pinged off a tower 2.5 miles from her home. Danielle's email account had not been accessed since 5 days before she went missing, and her bank account and credit cards hadn't been used since 2 days before she went missing. The day after Danielle's disappearance, Austin would show up at Danielle's friend's house alone to retrieve her car. He would tell the friend that he hadn't seen Danielle since the morning after the cookout. He said when he left the house to go pick up her car, Danielle was asleep on the couch, but when he returned, he claimed she was no longer there. Her purse and cell phone were missing and to this day have never been found. When Danielle's sister went to her home, she discovered the house was in disarray with items scattered all over the place. This was very unlike Danielle, who always kept her house very clean. She would also find Austin acting very strange and suspiciously had failed to report his wife missing. Immediately after Danielle's disappearance, Austin had his mother, who lived 7 hours away in Louisiana, come pick up their 3-year-old son and take him back to Louisiana with her. Danielle and Austin were going through a legal battle with Child Protective Services due to Austin's abuse of their 3 children, and he was facing felony injury charges. CPS would remove the 2 oldest boys that Danielle had from a previous marriage, and Austin was facing up to 2 years in prison for the charge. The children would also state that Austin always mistreated them when Danielle wasn't home. Austin's court date was set 1 week after Danielle's disappearance. It seems Austin and Danielle didn't have the best relationship with him, cloning her phone in order to monitor her calls and messages. And he also had stated that he didn't like Danielle's boys and hated spending money on children that weren't his. Austin had a previous arrest record and had threatened Danielle by saying if she ever left him, she would never take their son with her. Something really strange in the case was Austin and his friends would play a game where they would try and describe the best way to hide a body, and mutual friends heard the same kind of talk weeks before her disappearance. He even went as far as to say he scouted out 2 locations in Waller County to use if he ever needed to do such a thing. Strangely enough, the couple who hosted the party that Danielle and Austin were at the night before her disappearance moved out of the state suddenly after only living in the house for 3 months. Danielle and Austin's son together was Hagen, and he could be a key witness in the case. But Austin had his mother take him across the state line into Louisiana the morning before he reported Danielle missing. He also gave away Danielle's car 2 days before her disappearance. At this point, Austin and his mother retained a lawyer and have refused to speak to police about the case. He also lost touch with Danielle's family and has never participated in any of the ground searches or helped hand out missing person flyers because he stated that his attorney advised him not to. Austin has never been charged in her disappearance, but he remains a suspect in the case. As of today, Danielle has never been found and this case still remains a mystery. Michael Adams was last seen by his stepsister as she looked out her bedroom window at around 11:30 p.m. on June 8, 1987. Mike was 18 years old and lived in Abilene, Texas, and worked at M. Systems grocery store. On the night he disappeared, he had closed down the grocery store and then drove to his home on Peach Street. When he pulled into his driveway, he woke up his sister, Beverly, who was asleep upstairs. She got up and looked out the window and saw Mike talking to someone in an older model brown or gray GM with opera-style windows and possible malfunctioning headlights that were flickering. Police believe there was only one person in the car, although they received some tips that indicated there were two people. When Beverly saw this, she didn't think anything suspicious and assumed Mike was talking to a friend, and so she went back to sleep the next morning. Mike's stepmother woke up to leave for work and noticed that his car was behind hers, blocking her path out of the driveway. This was strange because Mike always arranged the cars ahead of time to prevent this from happening. When she went back inside to get Mike, he was nowhere to be found. Mike had some issues with some coworkers who got upset because Mike received a promotion over them and they believed it was because of his age. He also had a run-in with his manager, Steve Turner, because Mike had caught someone stealing from the back room. And instead of thanking him for catching the person, Steve reprimanded him for not being at the front of the store. This was very suspicious because in order to access the back room, an employee would have had to let the person in, or maybe an employee gave them a key. Mike was very upset about Steve's reaction and had planned to send a letter to corporate to complain about it, but ultimately decided against it. All employees were given polygraph tests and one employee would come out with inconclusive results. That person was a coworker of Mike's that had once said if he ever needed someone to disappear, all he would have to do is make a phone call. None of Mike's family has seen him since Beverly saw him through her bedroom window on the night he disappeared. Some tips came in later suggesting that Michael was assaulted and killed at the Lake Fort Phantom area. However, law enforcement investigated this claim, but nothing ever came of it. Other tips suggested that on the night he disappeared, he was visiting a house nearby for a short period of time around the 16th Street vicinity, or he was going for a short drive in a car with multiple occupants. Mike's store keys have never been recovered, and in 1994 he was declared legally dead. No one has ever been arrested in his disappearance, and as of today this case remains unsolved. Ronald Lee Johnson was 74 years old when he went missing from Newtown, North Dakota. On October 15, 2011, he was supposed to visit his son in Jamestown, but he never arrived. The next morning, he was seen in the Four Bears Casino and Lodge in Newtown on security footage playing poker, and then the footage shows him leaving around 12:35 a.m. The camera then caught him taking a right out of the casino onto Highway 23 towards Newtown. The tip that he was there came from a bank statement that showed a withdrawal from an ATM at the casino. That same day, he was supposed to see his sister in Valley City and then go to an appointment at the VA hospital in Fargo on October 17th. After the appointment, he had plans to go to Needles, California to spend the winter as he often did. However, he never made it to see his sister. He missed his appointment and he was never heard from again. When his son checked his father's home, he found groceries lying out and his suitcase half-packed. No one knows if he actually made it home and headed for Valley City as planned. Some people believe from the appearance of his home that Ronald might have been interrupted while packing and left suddenly for an unknown reason. However, the most plausible theory is he had already started packing his suitcase and laid out groceries for his trip before he ever went to the casino, and he never made it back home to finish packing. His medication and checkbook were left behind, but his 1982 gold Cadillac Fleetwood was missing. Authorities pinged his last known cell phone signal in the areas surrounding North Dakota Highway 23 and North Dakota Highway 83. They found he had called the person that usually rents his home from him while he is away in California for the winter. This area was searched by the North Dakota Civil Air Patrol, but no evidence of Ronald or his vehicle were found. With Ronald's car not turning up and his accounts never being used led to a theory that he might have had an accident. It is believed that he and his vehicle may have gone off the road into a ravine or into the Missouri River after he left the casino that early morning. He would have had to cross the Missouri River when he was headed back to Newtown. His family has organized many searches looking for Ronald and his vehicle, but they have turned up nothing. Ronald has no history of memory issues, but he is a diabetic and also had major heart surgery in the past and needs daily medications. Ronald has never been found, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Marla Mullins was 24 years old when she was last seen in Mineola, Texas on December 12, 1981. She went to a Christmas party at a restaurant across the street from the garage apartment where she lived. A female friend stated Marla left the restaurant at 8 p.m. with a man they both knew. The man stated he later took her back to the restaurant and claimed he saw her get into a vehicle with 3 people he didn't recognize. She has never been heard from again. After she went missing, there were rumors that she was working at a Houston, Texas nightclub, but police were never able to verify that. Also, her family didn't think she would have left without telling them. As of today, her only surviving relative is her sister, and she stated Marla had gotten involved with a rough crowd prior to her disappearance. Kevin Leon Curbo is the prime suspect in Marla's case. He is currently serving a life sentence for the 1995 murder of a Rains County, Texas woman. Authorities began searching a site along the Sabine River near Mineola, Texas for Marla's remains in May 2010. They stated information provided by Curbo led them to that location. However, nothing was found during the search. As of today, Marla remains missing and the case unsolved. Barbara Louise Cotton was born November 10, 1965 to Louise Cotton and lived in Williston, North Dakota. Her nickname was Barb, and she is described as a gentle and kind person who had 7 siblings. She went to Williston High School and worked part-time jobs to save up money for her future. She was a good student, and when she was a teenager, she decided she wanted to go to college and become an accountant. Sadly, she would never get the chance because she would go missing at the age of 15. This case is not easy because there are many conflicting details available. Barb's case was originally investigated as a runaway case. Investigators did not initially investigate the case as a missing person or possible homicide. At this time, there are 3 persons of interest. One report says that she was last seen leaving a restaurant named Cakes and Cones on Main Street in her hometown of Williston during the evening of April 11, 1981. She had apparently been there with Stacy Werder and a 3rd person. Stacy was described by Barb's mom, Louise, as being her new boyfriend. He offered to accompany her home afterwards, but she declined. Barb had 5 blocks to walk to get to her home, located near the corner of 5th Street West and 6th Avenue West. However, Barb was very independent and often walked alone, but it is unknown if she ever made it home after leaving the restaurant. Teenagers from the neighborhood often walked through Recreation Park on their way home. Her boyfriend watched her walk to Recreation Park. The next day, on April 12th, her mother reported her missing. However, none of her personal belongings were missing, including her carton of cigarettes, clothes, or money. She also left behind a paycheck from work. Her younger brother stated he was very close to Barbara, but she never told him of any plans to leave home. It is unclear where Barb was actually last seen the night she went missing. Another report says her mother claimed she was reportedly seen at a party at 10 p.m. that night, but that could not be confirmed. The next day, on April 13th, her mom reported to police that she thought that Barb was in Scobie, Montana at Pioneer Hotel with Stacy Werder. This may have been because she assumed she ran off with Stacy, and this is where he was scheduled to go for his next work assignment. Police followed up on this but noted she was not located at the hotel. According to reports, Stacy became a person of interest, although police may have never interviewed him. Stacy apparently hung himself 3 months later in Malta, Montana, while being jailed for an unrelated misdemeanor. Another person of interest is Frank Della Pena. Frank was temporarily in Williston for about a month during the time that Barb went missing. He left on May 5, 1981, 24 days after she disappeared. He drove a white van pulling a travel camper and had attempted to lure many women and children to the van and camper. He would attempt this by approaching them and saying that he had a free puppy he needed to find a home for because he was moving out of state. Many people came close to entering the van or camper, but thankfully they had second thoughts when Frank began asking them to step in and helped search for the puppy. Sadly, he was successful just 2 days after he left Williston for Wyoming and lured a 9- and 12-year-old girl inside and killed them. He was arrested and hung himself inside the jail and left behind a suicide note. A third person of interest in Barb's case is her older brother Frank Cotton. He was 16 years older than Barb and is described as a very strange man. He and Barb's mother were close, although he was at times abusive to her just as his father had been. Prior to their mother's death in 2014, she was heard multiple times saying she was going to hell for what she had done. However, she would never elaborate on what exactly she had done and would get angered when questioned about it. Many people believe that if Frank had killed Barb for whatever reason, that their mom may have covered for him either out of fear or loyalty. Frank died in 1999 at the age of 50. His headstone is next to Barb's headstone that reads missing. Barb was legally declared dead in 1998 and her mother passed away in 2014, maybe without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. Thanks to the hard work of the podcast Dakota Spotlight, many new details are coming out that was not well known before. Due to lack of investigation by police, when this originally happened, a lot of people that could hold significant information have been missed and never interviewed. Thankfully, some of these people are coming forward today and cooperating with the podcast to provide missing details. Barb has never been found, and as of today, this case remains open and unsolved. Kevin Gerald Mahoney was born June 23, 1968 and lived in Fargo, North Dakota and had 6 siblings. When he was 25 years old, he lived with his mother Judy, but spent most of his time at his friend Ben's house, which was also known as the Party House. In September of 1993, Ben had recently divorced and was renovating his home at 1118 11th Street North in Fargo with Kevin's help so he could sell it. Kevin's mom last saw him when he left home on September 30th, 1993 to go to Ben's. Ben and Kevin often worked on the house during the day and they would start drinking at night. On October 2nd, his family became concerned when they had not seen or heard from him in a few days, which was very unlike him. When his family began searching for him, they would question Ben, who told them that Kevin had left his home to walk to his brother's apartment 3 miles away in Moorhead. However, no one ever saw him walk in that evening. That same day, with no word from Kevin, his sister would file a missing persons report. A few days later, police went to Ben's home and talked to him. He told the police that he had not seen Kevin since September 30th, but did say that him and Kevin had gotten into an argument while working on the home. He said that Kevin called several of his family members looking for a ride, and then he assumed Kevin took off walking to his brother's apartment. Kevin's friend, Lena, said he did call her and ask for a ride, but she was unable to because she had to be at work. A few weeks later, after Kevin disappeared, Lena went to Ben's house to check it out. The door was unlocked and she let herself in. While looking around, she found a pair of jeans that had blood on it, which she took to the police and they determined it was human blood. Police would get a DNA sample from Kevin's mother and grandfather, but it is unclear if they ever tested it against the blood found on the pants. A few weeks later, after he disappeared, the police returned to Ben's house. However, this time Ben told police that Kevin was very drunk when he left the house and he didn't see which direction he went. Ben took a polygraph test 2 months after Kevin disappeared and passed. However, on a third interview, his story changed. He said the last time he saw Kevin was October 1st and they were both drunk. He said on the evening of October 1st, the two of them went to their friend Troy's apartment to help patch up some holes in the wall, because he was moving to Minnesota with his girlfriend Lynette. Ben said he left without Kevin that night because he assumed Troy was taking Kevin home. When Lynette was interviewed, she said that she last saw Kevin in the early morning hours of October 1st when the 4 of them went in her car to their apartment to fix the door, but realized they didn't have the right paint color. She said she then drove Ben and Kevin back to Ben's house around 1 a.m. and she went home. The next night, Troy and Lynette went to Ben's house and stayed over, but she never saw Kevin there. Many years after Kevin disappeared, multiple rumors were circulating about what happened to him. His family recalled that Kevin's friend Lynette had said that the day she found the jeans with blood on them, she also saw poured concrete that did not look like it was done professionally. Detectives went to further investigate the concrete, but Ben denied having ever done any concrete work in the basement. The owners of the home before and after Ben also denied doing any concrete work. In 2011, detectives decided to dig in the basement of the patch that was 90 inches long and about 20 inches wide. They excavated a small area, but stopped when they came upon a pipe. Many people believe that they did not dig far enough to be sure a body was not there. Suspiciously, many missing flower posters were often taken down by an unknown person. Several people have taken and passed lie detector tests in connection with this case. Sadly, Kevin's mother passed away in 2014, never knowing what happened to her son. Foul play is suspected in Kevin's disappearance, but he has never been found, and as of today, the case remains unsolved. Bruce Aaron Falconer was born July 16, 1959. He would join the Marines at the age of 16 with permission from his mother. In February of 1981, at the age of 21, he was promoted to sergeant. He was about to be transferred to Yuma, Arizona, and would take a leave to his home in Bismarck, North Dakota. This is when he would go missing and has never been seen again. While home on leave on the night of February 20th, Bruce went out with a grade school friend named Tim Jewell. They went to some bars, and after the bars closed, they drove Bruce's Chevrolet Blazer to an area south of Bismarck along the Missouri River. A few days later, the vehicle was found stuck in the mud and abandoned. However, there was no signs of Bruce or Tim at the scene, but there were cigarette butts and the remains of a campfire located nearby. Bruce's mother, Dorothy Falconer, was in California that weekend attending her daughter's wedding. When she returned home on either Sunday or Monday, her younger daughter told her Bruce had not come home since Friday night. Initially, there was speculation that Bruce had gone AWOL from the Marines, but his mother never believed this because he was very happy with his military career. Early on, his mother concluded he had probably died shortly after his disappearance because he would not have left behind his family or even his blazer or paychecks. In 1992, Tim's remains were found in the area by a hunter. The coroner determined that Tim's likely cause of death was exposure. However, Bruce's body has never been located. The Marines declared Bruce legally dead 5 years after he went missing. And as of today, this case remains unsolved. Rochelle Marie Smith was born September 10, 2002 and nicknamed Peanut. She lived in Minot, North Dakota with her Aunt Stephanie Smith, who was also her legal guardian. A man named Lee Cohen also lived in the basement of the home. On May 16, 2006, Lee came home around midnight after celebrating his birthday with a night of drinking. Rochelle was asleep on one couch while Lee was watching TV on another. Stephanie went to bed around 1 a.m., leaving the 3-year-old asleep on the couch and Lee still watching TV. Lee had been very close to Rochelle since she was an infant and claimed to be her father, although he wasn't related to her. At some point in the early morning, a neighbor heard Rochelle crying. Hours later, the same neighbor saw Lee pull into the apartment complex with Stephanie's van. The neighbor stated that he was acting strange and that he removed a red cooler and other items from the back of the van. Around 10:30 that morning, Stephanie woke up to find Rochelle gone and Lee already awake and dressed, which was very unusual for him. Lee told Stephanie that Rochelle was staying with his mother for a few days at her home at the Minot Air Force Base. During that same time, a different neighbor saw Lee going out to a waste bin with a bag of garbage, again acting very strange and standoffish. 6 days later, on May 22nd, Stephanie woke up to find that Lee had taken her van. He left a note saying he was going to pick up cigarettes, but he never returned. Stephanie reported Rochelle missing and an Amber Alert was issued, and Lee became the prime suspect in her disappearance. Stephanie went to Lee's mother's home and found out that she had actually moved to Wichita, Kansas the week prior. Police visited her home in Kansas, but there was no sign of Rochelle and she said she had not seen her. On May 23rd, the stolen van was located on a gravel road in the Upper Suras National Wildlife Refuge with Lee's body inside. He had died by poisoning himself with carbon monoxide. A hose from his basement apartment had been cut and used to pipe exhaust into the van. An extensive search of the area turned up no signs of Rochelle, but police did find a large red cooler in the basement where Lee lived. Inside the cooler was ammonia and rags apparently used to clean the cooler. They also found a substantial amount of Rochelle's blood. Police dogs tracked Rochelle's scent to the river channel across the street from the apartment, but authorities found no other clues. Searches were done of the parks along with horseback searches of wildlife and rural areas. A portion of the Suras River near the Smith residence was also drained, but nothing was ever found. Police determined the only explanation for Rochelle's disappearance was that Lee Cohen killed her early May 17, 2006 and disposed of her body in an unknown location. In May 2021, 15 years after Rochelle's disappearance, authorities stated that there was compelling and overwhelming evidence that Lee had murdered Rochelle and that there is no other plausible explanation for her disappearance. Her case was officially closed, but her body has never been recovered, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.